The air in the grand hall was thick with the scent of pine and polished wood, a smell that usually brought me comfort, reminding me of the towering forests outside our small mountain town in Montana. But today, it was choked with something else, the sharp, metallic tang of fear. My own fear. I pressed myself against the cold stone pillar, trying to melt into its rough surface. My plain, homespun dress, the color of old river stones, was meant to make me invisible. It usually worked. For 18 years, I'd perfected the art of disappearing, of being just another shadow flitting around the edges of our pack, the Willow Creek Pack. Being half-blood, half-human, half-something else, meant I was always half-seen, half-acknowledged. Mostly, though, I was just less. Today was the coronation, the day Alpha Kincaid would officially become King Kincaid of the Western Territories. A big deal. The kind of day where every wolf, every family, every pureblood proudly displayed their lineage. I was here because Ma, bless her gentle soul, was head cook for these grand events, and someone had to help carry platters of venison and wild berries. My job: stay quiet, stay low, and don't draw attention. Easy enough, right? Except today felt different. The air crackled with a strange energy, like before a huge lightning storm. My gaze flickered across the hall, past the booming laughter of the elders, past the elegant, snobbish daughters of the Beta and Gamma, girls like Bethany, whose eyes always held a smirk when they landed on me. Bethany, with her perfectly braided hair and her silk gown, was practically shimmering with anticipation, hoping to catch the new king's eye. She was pure, strong, and everything I wasn't. I clutched the small, smooth river stone in my pocket. Ma had given it to me when I was little, told me it would keep me grounded, keep me safe. Right now, it felt like the only solid thing in a world that was tilting. The elders, seated on their high-backed chairs, murmured among themselves, their faces stern. They were the ones who made the rules, who decided who belonged and who didn't. And they had made it very clear years ago that my kind, the mixed bloods, were an abomination. A mistake. We certainly couldn't ever bond with a pure alpha, let alone a king. The thought itself was laughable, forbidden. A sudden hush fell over the hall, so profound that the crackle of the fireplace sounded like thunder. The heavy oak doors at the far end swung inward, almost silently, revealing a figure that commanded instant respect, instant fear. King Kincaid. He strode in, tall and lean, but with a raw power that pulsed even from this distance. His dark hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp, and his eyes. They were like flint striking steel, gray and intense, taking in everything and giving nothing away. He wasn't traditionally handsome in the soft way some men were, but he was undeniably, breathtakingly alpha. Every wolf in the room straightened, an instinctual deferral to his strength. Even I felt it, a shiver running down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold draft. He walked past the bowing betas, past the curtsying gammas, past the preening pureblood daughters. His boots made no sound on the polished floor, but his presence was a roar. He moved with a predator's grace, unstoppable and deliberate. He was heading straight for the ornate throne at the head of the hall, where the crown, a circlet of silver claws, waited. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Stay hidden, Jesse. Don't look. Don't breathe too loud. But then it happened. As he passed my pillar, his head, which had been held high and unseeing, tilted. His nostrils flared, just a fraction. He paused. My blood turned to ice. My breath hitched. He was still several feet away, yet it felt like he was right in front of me, his gaze boring into my very soul. His eyes, those piercing gray eyes, swept across the crowd, past Bethany, past all the important faces, until they landed, with unnerving precision, directly on me. It was impossible. I had barely moved. I wore no scent that would stand out, nothing but the faint, earthy smell of the kitchen and the wild sage I'd brushed against this morning. My wolf scent, the faint, diluted part of me, was always suppressed, hidden deep. It had to be, but his gaze didn't waver. It intensified, narrowing slightly. A low growl, almost imperceptible to human ears, vibrated through the silent hall. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but it felt like it was ripping through me. He took another step, then another, deviating from his path to the throne. Each step echoed in the sudden, terrified silence of the hall. Every head turned, following his movement, then turning to see where his focus lay. He was coming for me. My mind screamed, "No, no, no. This can't be happening." My skin crawled with dread and a strange, unwelcome awareness. My half-blood heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. He stopped directly in front of my pillar, close enough that I could smell him now, pine, fresh snow, and raw, untamed power. It was an intoxicating, terrifying scent that made my knees weak. His eyes, shockingly close, were no longer flint. They were burning embers, alight with something I couldn't name. His hand, strong and calloused, reached out, not to me, but to the air beside my head. He pushed aside a stray strand of my dark, unassuming hair, a strand I hadn't even realized had escaped my bun. And then, his voice, deep and resonant, cut through the oppressive silence, shaking the very foundations of the hall. It wasn't a question, but a declaration. I recognized that scent. His words were a death sentence. Or something far, far worse. The entire hall collectively gasped. Whispers erupted like angry hornets. Bethany's face was a mask of shock and fury. The elders, their faces grim, exchanged worried glances. I stood frozen, trembling, a deer caught in the headlights. The weight of every single pair of eyes in that hall was crushing me. They knew what this meant. He recognized my scent, a half-blood scent, and the Alpha King, on his coronation day, had just called it out for all to hear. My life, as I knew it, was over. Please let me know where you are watching from and what the weather is like there today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of Jesse's story. The silence in the coronation hall was no longer empty. It was heavy, pressing against my lungs like water. I could hear the frantic drumming of my own heart, a sound so loud I was sure the king could hear it. King Kincaid didn't move. He stood there, a mountain of dark leather and cold steel, his gray eyes locked onto mine. I don't know what you mean, sire," I managed to whisper. My voice felt thin, like a thread about to snap. I took a small step back, my heel catching on the uneven stone floor. Behind him, the Alpha Council elders surged forward. These were the men who held the old laws like weapons. Elder Silas, a man with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes as cold as a winter morning, stepped into the light. His gaze flicked to me, and I saw the instant flash of recognition and disgust. "King Kincaid," Silas said, his voice a dry rasp. "The ceremony is waiting. This girl is merely a servant, a kitchen stray. She has no place in the presence of the throne." Kincaid didn't even look at him. His focus remained entirely on me. A kitchen stray doesn't smell like the ancient pines of the high peaks. She doesn't smell like the blood of the first wolves. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low rumble that only I could hear. "Why are you hiding, Jesse?" Fear, sharp and jagged, sliced through me. He knew my name. How could he know my name? I was the embarrassment of the Willow Creek pack. My father had been a human drifter who had charmed my mother and then vanished before I was even born. To the pack, I was a reminder of a moment of weakness, a dilute bloodline that should have been weeded out generations ago. "I'm not hiding," I lied, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. "I'm just a half-blood. I'm nothing." At the word half-blood, A collective hiss went through the crowd. Bethany, the beta's daughter, pushed through the front row. Her face was flushed with anger, her silk dress rustling as she pointed a finger at me. She's an abomination. My father told me the elders were going to exile her mother last winter. They only let them stay because of the kitchen work. Kincaid's head snapped toward Bethany. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The power radiating from him was no longer a hum. It was a physical weight that made Bethany stumble back, her mouth snapping shut in fear. "I did not ask for the opinion of a pup," Kincaid said coldly. He turned back to the elders, his posture shifting into something truly regal and terrifying. "The laws of the Western Territories state that the king chooses his own court. And I find myself curious about this one." He reached out, his fingers brushing the silver pendant hidden beneath the collar of my dress, a small, carved wolf's tooth I had worn since I was a child. Elder Silas stepped between us, his face purple with indignation. "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. The law is absolute. Mixed bloodlines are rot. They cannot hold rank, they cannot own land, and they most certainly cannot be recognized by a king. To do so would be to spit in the face of our ancestors." "Then perhaps our ancestors lived in a world too small," Kincaid replied. He looked at the high-backed chairs of the council. "I will complete the coronation, but the girl comes with me to the high table." A roar of protest went up from the elders. My mother, watching from the kitchen doorway, had her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. I looked at her, and my heart broke. She had spent her whole life trying to keep me safe by keeping me small. In 1 minute, King Kincaid had dragged me into a light that would likely burn us both to ash. "I can't go there," I whispered to him, my eyes pleading. "Please, just let me go back to the kitchen. They'll kill me for this." "Let them try," Kincaid said. It wasn't a boast, it was a simple fact. He held out his arm, a silent command for me to take it. The eyes of every wolf in Montana were on me. If I refused, I insulted the king. If I accepted, I broke the laws of the council. I looked at the silver claw crown resting on its velvet cushion, then back at the man who seemed to see me when no one else ever had. I reached out and placed my small, calloused hand on his forearm. His skin was burning hot through his sleeve, a stark contrast to the cold hall. The moment our skin met, a jolt of energy, something ancient and wild, shot through my arm and settled deep in my chest. My wolf, the small, quiet part of me I had kept caged for years, suddenly let out a howl of recognition that made my knees tremble. "Good," Kincaid murmured. He led me toward the throne, walking right through the center of the crowd. The wolves parted for him like a forest yielding to a fire. I walked beside him, my head down, feeling the heat of Bethany's stare and the murderous silence of the elders. We reached the high table, a massive slab of oak where the powerful sat. Kincaid pulled out a chair reserved for a high-ranking beta, and gestured for me to sit. "Sit, Jessie," he commanded. I sank into the chair, feeling like a fraud in my gray homespun dress. The elders took their places across from us, their faces carved from stone. The ceremony continued, but the joy was gone. The atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension, the kind that precedes a civil war. As the silver circlet was placed upon Kincaid's head and the hall erupted into the traditional howl of loyalty, I felt a hand cover mine under the table. Kincaid didn't look at me, but his grip was firm, grounding me. "The coronation is over," Kincaid announced as the echoes of the howl died down. "Tonight we feast. Tomorrow we discuss the new laws of the West." "There is nothing to discuss," Elder Silas barked, standing up. "The law is the law, boy. You may wear the crown, but the council holds the keys to the territories. We will not allow a half-blood to sit at this table." Kincaid rose slowly, his shadows stretching long across the floor. "Then you will find the locks have changed, Silas." He turned to me, His gray eyes softened just a fraction.
Come.
You've had enough of this cage for one night. He led me out of the hall and into the crisp night air of the mountains. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the black sky like diamonds. We walked in silence until we reached the edge of the stone terrace overlooking the valley. Why me? I finally asked, the question burning in my throat. There are 100 pure-blood women in there who would give their lives for a glance from you. Why pick the one person who brings you nothing but trouble? Kincaid looked out over the dark trees. Because they all smell like ambition and lies, Jessie. You smell like the truth. He turned to me, his expression grim. And the truth is, I've been looking for you for a very long time. Before I could ask what he meant, a low, mournful howl rose from the woods below. It wasn't a howl of loyalty. It was a warning. They're coming, Kincaid whispered, his hand going to the hilt of the blade at his belt. Who? I asked, my heart beginning to race again. The ones who think they can decide who is worthy of life, he said. The council's private guard. They won't wait for tomorrow. He grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the dark tree line. We have to move.
Now.
I looked back at the lights of the hall, where my mother was still working, where the only home I'd ever known sat. Then I looked at the king, the man who had just declared war on my behalf. I ran. The transition from the warmth of the hall to the biting Montana night was like a slap to the face. The air up here, near the high peaks, didn't just carry a chill. It carried the scent of ancient ice and predatory shadows. I stumbled behind Kincaid, my thin leather shoes never meant for the jagged rocks and tangled roots of the deep timber. Kincaid, wait. I hissed, my lungs burning. My mother, she's still in there. If they find us gone, they'll take it out on her. Kincaid stopped abruptly, spinning around. He caught me by the shoulders to steady me. His touch was like a brand, sending that strange, electric hum through my veins again. I have my own men, Jessie. Loyal men from the north who have already moved her to the safe house near the falls. I wouldn't leave a flank unguarded. I stared at him, my breath hitching in my chest. You planned this? You knew you were going to cause a riot at your own coronation. I knew I was going to find you, he corrected, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. Everything else is just the cost of doing business. A chorus of snaps and rustles echoed from the brush behind us. The council's guard wasn't far behind. These weren't just soldiers. They were the blood purifiers, a group of fanatics the elders kept to enforce the purity laws. They didn't just arrest people. They made them disappear. Keep your head down and stay in my shadow, Kincaid commanded. He didn't shift, not yet. An alpha king in his human form was still a force of nature, but shifting in these tight trees would slow us down. We dove into a thicket of hemlock, the needles scratching at my face. I followed the broad set of his shoulders, marveling at how he navigated the pitch-black forest as if it were midday. My own eyes, hampered by my human half, struggled to see more than a few feet ahead. Why me? I whispered, the question of a desperate ghost in the dark. You said you've been looking for me. I'm just a kitchen girl from a rural pack. I've never even been outside this county. Do you know why the elders hate mixed bloodlines so much, Jessie? Kincaid asked, not looking back as he vaulted over a fallen cedar. It's not because you're weak. It's because you're unpredictable. A pure-blood wolf is a known quantity. They have a rank, a scent, a role. But a half-blood, you carry the human's ability to choose and the wolf's ancient power. My father's journals spoke of a girl with a scent like moonlight. A girl who was the key to the high peaks. I'm not a key, I argued, tripping over a root. He caught me before I hit the ground, hauling me up effortlessly. I'm a girl who can't even shift properly. My wolf is just a whisper in the back of my head. Maybe because you've spent your life trying to drown her out, Kincaid said, his eyes flashing silver for a fleeting second. Suddenly, a massive gray wolf burst from the undergrowth to our left. Its eyes were a sickly, glowing yellow, the mark of a wolf driven by hate rather than instinct. It lunged for my throat. Before I could even scream, Kincaid's hand shot out. He didn't use a weapon. He caught the beast by its throat midair. The sheer strength required to stop a 300-pound killing machine with one hand was staggering. With a guttural snarl, Kincaid slammed the wolf into a tree trunk. The sound of breaking bone cracked through the air. The wolf slumped, whimpering, and shifted back into a naked, broken man. "Go back to Silas," Kincaid told the man, his voice colder than the surrounding snow. "Tell him he sent too few." We didn't wait for a response. We ran deeper into the mountains, where the trees grew so thick the starlight couldn't reach the floor. Eventually, we reached a hidden crevice in the rock face, the entrance to a small cave hidden behind a frozen waterfall. Inside, Kincaid struck a match, lighting a small torch wedged into the stone. The flickering light danced over his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "We stay here for a few hours," he said, chest heaving slightly. "They won't cross the white water at night. They're too afraid of the spirits that dwell there." I sank onto a flat rock, burying my face in my hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. "Everything is ruined. My life, my mother's peace. You've turned the whole world against us." Kincaid walked over and knelt in front of me. He didn't reach out this time, but his presence was a warm blanket. "The world was already against you, Jesse. You were just too busy surviving to notice the knife at your back. Silas was going to authorize your cleansing next week. That's why I came when I did." My head snapped up. "Cleansing. A fancy word for execution," he said grimly. "They're terrified of the prophecy, Jesse. They think if a king bonds with a half-blood, the council's power will crumble. They weren't going to let you reach your 19th birthday." I felt a coldness settle in my bones that no fire could touch. My own pack, the people I had cooked for, the children I had watched play, they were going to let me die just for existing. "You said bond," I whispered, my heart skipping a beat. "You're an alpha king. You're supposed to find a high alpha female. A queen. You can't bond with me. The law." "I am the king," Kincaid interrupted, his voice thick with a sudden, raw emotion. He reached out then, his thumb brushing my cheek, wiping away a tear I didn't know I'd shed. "And I don't give a damn about the laws of men who hide in stone halls while the world burns." I felt it the moment I walked into that room. The pull. The scent. My wolf didn't ask for a pureblood. He asked for you. The intensity in his gaze made me want to run and stay all at once. It was too much. I was a girl from the dirt, and he was a man from the clouds. "I don't even know how to be a wolf, Kincaid," I breathed. "Then I will teach you," he whispered. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. In the silence of the cave, with the roar of the waterfall outside, the world felt like it had narrowed down to just the two of us. Two outcasts in a kingdom of gold. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll keep watch. Tomorrow we will climb. We're going to the high peaks. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to find the rest of your soul." I wanted to argue, to say I couldn't do it, but my eyes were already closing. As I drifted off, the last thing I felt was the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my hand, a king's heart, beating for a half-blood girl. I woke with a gasp, the cold seeping into my bones. The cave was still dark, save for the faint glow of the torch, now just a flickering ember. Kincaid was gone from my side, but the faint scent of pine and snow still clung to the air, a comforting anchor in the strange, new reality of my life. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My body ached from the unexpected sprint through the forest. My plain dress was torn and dirt-smudged. I was no longer the invisible kitchen hand. I was the Alpha King's fugitive. The thought was so absurd it almost made me laugh, a hysterical bubble that died in my throat. "You're awake." Kincaid's voice, deep and calm, came from the cave entrance. He stepped back into the flickering light, carrying a small haversack and a canteen. I found some wild berries and a clear spring. Not much, but it will have to do. He offered me the canteen. The water was icy cold, refreshing, and tasted of clean mountain rock. I drank deeply, feeling some of the fear recede. Are they still out there? I asked, my voice hoarse. They won't come across the white water in the dark, Kincaid confirmed, his eyes scanning the cave entrance. But they'll be on our heels by sunup. We need to move. He tossed me a pair of sturdy, worn leather boots. These belong to one of my northern scouts. They'll be a bit big, but better than what you're wearing. I slipped off my tattered shoes and pulled on the boots. They were indeed large, but the thick wool socks he also provided made them wearable. They felt heavy and solid, like a promise of protection. The high peaks aren't just a mountain range, Jesse, Kincaid explained, kneeling to check the laces of his own boots. They're a sacred place. The old stories say the first wolves made their dens there. It's a place where the veil between our world and the spirit world is thin. It's where your mother's people, the Silver Lake bloodline, drew their power. My mother never spoke of it, I said, remembering her hushed whispers about her family, always laced with fear. She was protecting you, Kincaid said, his gaze softening. Her father, your grandfather, was a powerful elder of the Silver Lake Pack. He resisted my father's expansion. My father, the king before me, was a tyrant. He believed in absolute purity, absolute control. He systematically hunted down and cleansed any pack that harbored mixed bloodlines or dared to question his rule. Your mother fled the high peaks with you when she learned of his plans. A cold dread seeped into my stomach. And you? Are you like him? Kincaid's jaw tightened. My father ruled through fear. I learned from his mistakes. He destroyed the very thing he sought to protect. Our strength isn't in purity, Jesse. It's in unity. My vision for the Western Territories is one where all bloodlines are respected. That's why Silas and his council despise me. They want the old ways. They want to keep power in the hands of the purebloods. He stood up, his gaze meeting mine. And that's why they want you dead. Because if I, the king, openly accept a half-blood and claim her, it shatters everything they believe in. And everything they have built. So, I'm a symbol? I asked, feeling a strange mix of anger and awe. You are my symbol, he corrected, his voice firm. But first, you are a person who needs to survive. And to do that, you need to understand who you truly are. We left the cave as the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth. Kincaid led the way, his movements fluid and silent, like a shadow dancing through the trees. The climb was relentless. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned with every step. But Kincaid never pushed me beyond my limit. He would stop, point out a sturdy root to hold onto, or offer a steadying hand. He moved with the patience of a seasoned guide, an unexpected tenderness from a man who had seemed so unyielding in the Coronation Hall. As we ascended, the trees began to thin, replaced by ancient, gnarled pines clinging to the rocky slopes. The air grew thinner, colder. The silence here was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the crunch of our boots on stone. Feel that, Jesse? Kincaid asked, stopping at a narrow ledge. Below us, the world stretched out, a vast expanse of green forest that gradually faded into the distant, snow-capped peaks. The high peaks have a spirit. It flows through the rock, through the air, through us. I closed my eyes, trying to focus. And then I felt it. A subtle hum, a deep vibration beneath my feet, in my chest. It was like a dormant part of me was slowly, painstakingly, waking up. The small, quiet whisper of my wolf, usually so faint, seemed to grow a little louder, a little clearer. It was a sense of belonging I had never felt before. I think so, I breathed, opening my eyes. Good, Kincaid said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. It transformed his stern face, making him look less like a battle-hardened king and more like a man who understood the secrets of the earth. Your human half is what keeps you grounded, but your wolf half connects you to this world, to magic. You just need to learn how to listen to her. We continued climbing, the sun now a bright disk in the sky. My legs were numb, my head light, but there was a strange exhilaration coursing through me. For the first time, I felt like I was moving toward something, not just running away. Finally, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, we reached a plateau. Before us lay a hidden valley, nestled between three towering peaks. In its center, fed by melting snow, was a crystal-clear lake, its surface reflecting the vibrant sky. And all around it, instead of trees, grew fields of luminous silver flowers, glowing faintly in the fading light. The Silver Lake, Kincaid murmured, his voice filled with reverence. The heart of your mother's people. I walked towards the edge of the plateau, feeling drawn by an invisible thread. The air here was different, tingling with an ancient energy. As I stepped onto the grassy bank, the silver flowers seemed to hum. My wolf, the one I had kept locked away for so long, let out a joyous yelp in my mind, a clear, powerful sound that brought tears to my eyes. This is where you'll learn, Kincaid said, coming to stand beside me. This is where you'll find your true self, Jessie. But first we rest. We have a long journey ahead, and an even longer fight. He gestured to a small cave carved into the rock face near the lake, barely visible against the twilight. That will be our home for a while. It belonged to your ancestors. It's safe. I looked out at the Silver Lake, at the glowing flowers, at the vast, wild beauty of the high peaks. It felt like I had stepped into a dream, but the sharp ache in my muscles and the fear in my heart reminded me this was real. My life has changed forever, and I was standing beside the king who had ripped open my hidden world, ready to face whatever came next. The cave by the Silver Lake was different from the damp crevice behind the waterfall. The walls here were smooth, polished by hands that had lived here centuries ago. Ancient carvings, wolves running under a crescent moon, were etched into the stone, glowing with a faint, iridescent light that matched the flowers outside. Kincaid moved with a quiet efficiency, starting a small, smokeless fire using dried moss and flint. The light played over the scars on his arms, reminders of battles fought for a crown he now used to protect a girl with no name. "You're staring," he said, not looking up from the flames. "I'm wondering," I corrected, sitting cross-legged on a pile of soft furs he'd pulled from a hidden stone chest. "You're an alpha king. You could have any life you wanted. Why risk it all for a prophecy and a girl who can't even howl?" Kincaid finally looked at me. The firelight turned his gray eyes into molten silver. "Because for the first time in 20 years, the air doesn't feel stagnant, Jessie. The council thinks they are preserving our kind by keeping us pure, but they are actually suffocating us. We are becoming stagnant, weak. You aren't a mistake. You are the evolution they are afraid of." He stood and walked toward me, offering a piece of dried meat and a handful of the glowing berries from the valley. "Eat. Tonight is the first night of the waxing moon. The energy of the lake will be at its peak. It's time for you to meet your other half." After we ate, he led me down to the water's edge. The Silver Lake was as still as a mirror. The towering peaks above us seemed to lean in, watching. "Take off your boots," Kincaid commanded softly. "Walk into the water until it reaches your knees." I hesitated. The mountain air was freezing, and the water looked like liquid ice. But the look in his eyes, steady, encouraging, made me move. I pulled off the heavy leather boots and stepped onto the submerged stones. The cold was a shock, a sharp needle that traveled up my spine. I gasped, shivering, but Kincaid walked in behind me. He placed his large, warm hands on my shoulders, his heat bleeding through my thin dress. "Don't fight the cold, Jesse," he whispered in my ear. "Accept it. It's part of the mountain. It's part of you. Close your eyes. Stop being Jessie the kitchen girl. Stop being an embarrassment. Just breathe." I closed my eyes. At first, all I felt was the biting chill and the fear of the dark. But Kincaid's hands were like anchors. I focused on his breathing, slow, rhythmic, and powerful. Slowly, the splashing of the water began to sound like music. The wind through the silver flowers sounded like 1,000 tiny bells. "Now," Kincaid murmured, his voice sounding like it was coming from inside my own head. "Find the whisper. The one you've been pushing down since you were 6 years old. The one that told you to run when the hunters came. The one that told you the alpha was coming before he even opened the door." I reached deep, past the memories of Bethany's sneers, past the smell of the kitchen grease, into the dark, quiet center of my soul. There, curled in a ball, and shivering just like I was a white wolf. She was small, her fur the color of the mountain mist, but her eyes, they were the same gray as Kincaid's. "I see you," I thought. The wolf in my mind uncurled. She stood, stretching her lean limbs, and let out a sound that wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a low, vibrating growl of recognition. Suddenly, the water around my legs didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like silk. My skin began to tingle, a million tiny needles of heat erupting under the surface. My bones felt fluid, like they were melting and reforming. "That's it." Kincaid's voice was strained, thick with an emotion I couldn't identify. "Don't be afraid of the change. Let her out." I felt a surge of raw, primal power. It wasn't the refined, controlled power Kincaid used. It was wild. It was the high peaks and the silver lake. My vision shifted, colors becoming more vivid, smells becoming a library of information. I could smell the sap in the trees a mile away. I could hear the heartbeat of a hawk nesting on the crags above. I didn't shift, not fully. My body was still human, but my hands were tipped with sharp, translucent claws, and my canine teeth had grown into points. I turned to look at Kincaid, and for the first time, I didn't see a king. I saw my mate. The word hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a political alliance or a prophecy. Our souls were tied together with a cord of silver fire. The council's laws didn't matter. The elders' hatred didn't matter. Kincaid gasped, his hands tightening on my shoulders. His eyes were fully silver now, his pupils dilated until they were thin slits. "Jessie," he breathed, "your scent, it's changing." He leaned down, his nose brushing the pulse point on my neck. I tilted my head back, a low, purring sound escaping my throat. I wanted to bury myself in his strength, to let his power consume mine. But then, a sharp, discordant sound shattered the moment. A horn. The brassy, arrogant call of the council's high guard. Kincaid snapped his head toward the plateau we had climbed earlier. Far below, a line of torches snaked up the mountain like a fire serpent. They hadn't stayed on the other side of the white water. Silas must have offered them a bounty too high to refuse, or perhaps he had sent something darker than men. "They're here," I whispered, the claws on my fingers digging into my palms as I clenched my fists. The Jessie, part of me was terrified, but the white wolf was snarling, ready to tear out throats. Kincaid stepped out of the water, pulling me with him. His face was back to the stone mask of a king, but there was a new fire in his eyes. "They've desecrated the sacred ground," he said, his voice echoing off the peaks. "They think they can bring their hate into the Silver Lake." He looked at me, grabbing my hand. "We can't stay in the cave. We'll be trapped. We have to lead them into the crags. In the maze of the rocks, your new senses will be our greatest weapon." "I don't know how to fight, Kincaid," I said, looking at my clawed hands. "You don't fight like a soldier," he said, leaning down to press a hard, lingering kiss to my forehead. You fight like a storm. You're the Silver Lake bloodline, Jesse. Show them why they spent 20 years trying to extinguish your light.
He shifted then.
It was a violent, beautiful transformation. One moment he was a man, and the next, a massive black wolf, as big as a grizzly, stood where he had been. He let out a howl that shook the very stars, a challenge to the fire serpent climbing the mountain. I didn't shift into a wolf, but I ran beside him, my feet light on the stones, my heart beating in sync with the king's. The hunt had begun, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't the prey. The crags were a nightmare of jagged limestone and bottomless fissures that sat like a crown above the Silver Lake. In the moonlight, the rocks looked like the bleached bones of giants. This was no place for a human, and even a pure-blood wolf would struggle with the razor-sharp edges and the deceptive echoes. But as I ran beside the massive black wolf that was Kincaid, I didn't feel like a clumsy kitchen girl. The tingling in my skin had settled into a steady hum of power. My vision was no longer dark. The world was a map of heat and vibration. I could see the warmth of Kincaid's body as a glowing amber aura, and I could feel the cold, dead spots where the council's men were approaching. There, I whispered, pointing toward a narrow chimney in the rock. Kincaid let out a low huff, a sound of agreement. He pushed me toward the shadows of a towering pillar. We didn't have to wait long. The sound of heavy boots and clanking metal armor announced the arrival of the High Guard. These weren't the local boys from our village. These were the enforcers, men who had been trained to hunt their own kind. Leading them was a man I recognized from the Coronation, Captain Hallow, Silas's right-hand man. He had a face like a hatchet and eyes that saw only the letter of the law. Spread out, Hallow barked, his voice echoing and distorting against the stone. The half-blood scent is all over this lake. Find her, and bring me her head. The king is to be restrained, by any means necessary. The restrained part was a lie. I saw the silver-tipped crossbows they carried. They weren't planning on taking Kincaid back to a throne. They were planning on making him a martyr, so the council could rule in his name. Beside me, Kincaid's fur stood on end. He was a shadow within a shadow, his golden eyes fixed on Hallow. He looked at me, a silent question in his gaze. Are you ready? I closed my eyes for a split second, calling to the white wolf. She didn't just whisper this time. She surged forward. I felt my height increase slightly, my muscles coiling like springs. I didn't shift into a four-legged beast, but I was no longer entirely human. I was something the world hadn't seen in centuries, a lunar hybrid. I'm ready, I breathed. Kincaid didn't bark. He simply vanished. One moment, an enforcer was standing 10 feet away, leveling his crossbow at a shadow. The next, a black blur hit him. There was no scream, only the sound of a heavy body hitting the rock. Kincaid moved like smoke, picking them off one by one in the periphery of their torchlight. Panic began to set in among the guard. He's in the rocks. To the left, one shouted, firing a silver bolt into the dark. It hissed harmlessly against the stone. Behind you, another shrieked. It was my turn. I didn't have Kincaid's massive strength, but I had the speed of the wind. I dropped from my perch on the pillar, landing silently behind two guards who were back to back. They didn't even smell me. The Silver Lake flowers had masked my scent with their own perfume. I reached out, my translucent claws slicing through the leather straps of their armor as easily as paper. I didn't kill them. The human in me still hesitated at that line, but I disabled them, striking the pressure points in their necks that Ma had taught me for healing. They slumped to the ground, unconscious before they realized they were under attack. Who's there? Hallow roared, spinning around and swinging a silver-edged claymore. The blade whistled inches from my nose as I flipped backward, landing on a narrow ledge. The abomination you're looking for, Captain, I said, my voice echoing from 3 different directions thanks to the crags. Hallow looked up, his face twisted in a snarl. You think a little mountain magic makes you a wolf, girl? You're a stain on our history. Silas was right to order your end. He raised his hand, signaling his remaining 5 men to circle the ledge. They raised their crossbows, the silver tips gleaming with a lethal light. Kincaid emerged from the darkness behind them, his teeth bared, ready to leap. But I held up a hand, stopping him. I needed to know if I could do this. I needed to know if the mistake the council hated was actually their downfall. You talk about history, Hallow, I said, stepping to the very edge of the precipice. The wind caught my hair, pulling it back to reveal the silver pendant glowing against my skin. But you've forgotten the oldest part of it. The high peaks don't belong to the council. They belong to the lake. I reached out with my mind, not to the wolf, but to the water below. I felt the deep, cold heartbeat of the silver lake. I felt the silver flowers and the ancient sap in the roots. Help me, I whispered to the mountain. A low rumble started deep in the earth. It wasn't an earthquake, but a vibration so high it made the silver bolts in the guards' crossbows shatter. The men cried out, dropping their weapons as the silver shards burned their hands. Hallow stumbled, his eyes widening in genuine terror. What are you? I'm the choice the king made, I said. The ground beneath the guards' feet suddenly turned to slick, liquid ice. They slid toward the edge of the shallow crevice, shouting in fear. Kincaid lunged then, not to kill, but to herd them. He stood between them and Hallow, a wall of black fur and snarling teeth. Hallow, seeing his men defeated by a girl they had called a stray, lost his nerve. He turned to run, but Kincaid was faster. The Alpha King shifted back into his human form mid-stride, his naked chest gleaming with sweat and moonlight. He tackled Hallow, pinning him to the jagged rock. Kincaid's hand was wrapped around Hallow's throat. Go back to Silas, Kincaid growled, his voice vibrating with the power of the crown. Tell him the high peaks have spoken. Tell him that if he sends one more man into these mountains, I won't send them back in pieces. I'll come to the village and tear his council hall down with my bare hands. He released Hallow, who scrambled away, gasping for air. The captain didn't look back. He and his remaining men fled down the mountain, their torches flickering out one by one. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of our breathing. Kincaid turned to me. He was bruised, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, and completely exposed to the elements. But he looked at me with a reverence that made my heart ache. You did it, he whispered. You called to the mountain. I didn't think it would work, I admitted, my claws retracting as the adrenaline began to fade. I felt small again and very, very tired. Kincaid walked over and pulled me into his arms. His skin was hot against my cold dress, a furnace in the winter night. It worked because you stopped fighting yourself, Jesse. He pulled back, his hands framing my face. They'll be back. Silas will use this. He'll tell the people I've been corrupted by witch blood. He'll call for a full-scale war. Then we give them a war, I said, my voice surprising even me with its firmness. But not here. We went to the village. We show the people that a half-blood isn't a rot. We show them that the king is still their king. Kincaid looked at me for a long time, the gray in his eyes swirling like a storm. You're not just a hybrid, are you? You're a leader. I'm a girl who's tired of being invisible, I said. He kissed me then, not a gentle kiss, but a hard, desperate seal of a bond that was now unbreakable. As we stood there in the ruins of the crags, I knew the easy part was over. The coronation was a memory. The rebellion had truly begun. The hike back down from the high peaks was different from the climb up. We weren't just fleeing anymore. We were a storm gathering strength. Every time my feet hit the earth, I felt the pulse of the mountain beneath me. I wasn't just walking, I was part of the landscape. Kincaid stayed in his human form for the trek, draped in a heavy fur cloak he'd retrieved from the cave. He walked with a heavy silence, his hand never more than an inch from mine. The bond between us, that silver cord I'd felt at the lake, was humming. I could feel his anger, a low simmering heat, and his resolve, which felt like solid iron. "The village will be a hornet's nest," Kincaid said as we reached the lower timberline where the massive pines gave way to the smaller, tighter thickets of Willow Creek. "Silas has had 12 hours to spin his tale. By now, the townspeople probably think I've been bewitched by a demon." "They know me, Kincaid," I said, though my heart wavered. "I've lived there my whole life. I've mended their clothes and cooked their funeral feasts." "Fear makes people forget kindness, Jesse," he warned. "To them, you were safe when you were less. Now that you're more, you're a threat." We approached the outskirts of the village just as the sun began to dip behind the western ridges, casting long, bloody shadows across the valley. The usual evening sounds, the clinking of cowbells and the calls of children, were absent. The air felt brittle. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a woodpile. I gasped, my claws extending instinctively, but Kincaid caught my wrist. "Wait," he said. It was Gabe, a young wolf I'd grown up with. He was a year younger than me, a beta blood who had always been too kind for his own good. His face was pale, his eyes darting around the shadows. "Jesse? King Kincaid," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here. Silas has the enforcers at every crossroads. They've arrested your mother." The world seemed to tilt.
Ma?
"Where is she?" "In the old lockup beneath the council hall," Gabe said, stepping closer. "Silas says she's a practitioner of the dark arts, that she used human blood to poison the king's mind. He's planning a public trial at dawn. But everyone knows what that means. It's an execution." I felt a snarl rip through my throat, a sound that was entirely wolf. The ground beneath my feet cracked slightly, a small tremor answering my rage. Kincaid's grip on my hand tightened, grounding me. "Where are the king's guard?" "My men from the north." "Silas told them you were dead," Gabe said, looking at Kincaid with a mix of awe and fear. "He showed them a torn cloak covered in blood and said the half-blood killed you in the forest. Most of them are being held in the barracks under guard. The village is split, sire. Some believe him. Others are just too scared to speak." Kincaid looked at me, his jaw set. "He's forcing our hand. He wants us to attack the hall so he can claim we're the aggressors." "I don't care about politics anymore," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "He has my mother. He's used her as a pawn in his game for long enough." "We go in tonight," Kincaid decided. "Not as an army. As ghosts." He turned to Gabe. "Can you get a word to my men in the barracks? Tell them the king is alive. Tell them to wait for the howl." Gabe nodded frantically. "I'll try, sire. But be careful. Silas has brought in the iron binds, mercenaries who use chains dipped in wolfsbane." Gabe vanished back into the shadows. Kincaid led me toward the back alleys of the village, moving through the familiar paths I had walked 1,000 times. Every house we passed felt like a stranger's home now. I saw faces I recognized through the windows. Mrs. Gable, who I'd brought soup to last winter. Mr. Henderson, whose boots I'd cleaned. They were all huddled inside, their doors barred. We reached the stone wall of the council hall. It was an ugly, squat building that sat like a weight on the village square. 2 guards stood at the main doors, their spears gleaming. "The lockup is through the cellar vents," I whispered. "I used to deliver bread there. I know the way." We crawled through the shadows, avoiding the sweep of the torches. I led Kincaid to a small, iron-grated window at the base of the foundation. It was choked with weeds and filth. I reached out, my hybrid strength making the rusted bars feel like dry twigs. I pulled them apart with a muffled groan of metal. I slipped through the gap first, landing on the cold, damp floor of the cells. The air here smelled of mold and old tears.
"Ma?"
I whispered into the dark. "Jesse." A weak, familiar voice came from the far corner. I ran to the iron gate of the last cell. My mother was sitting on a bench, her hair disheveled, a bruise blooming on her cheek. When she saw me, really saw me, with my glowing eyes and the aura of the high peaks clinging to me, she didn't scream.
She wept.
"You found her," she breathed, reaching through the bars to touch my face. "You found the wolf." "I found everything, Ma," I said, my claws making short work of the lock. I pulled the door open and gathered her into my arms. "I'm getting you out of here." "Not so fast, little stray." The voice came from the stairs. Silas stepped into the cellar, followed by 4 men draped in heavy, dark chains. The air in the room suddenly turned toxic. The smell of wolfsbane, bitter and burning, filled the small space. Kincaid stepped in front of us, his body tensing. "Silas, your reign of whispers ends tonight, does it?" Silas smirked, gesturing to the chains. "You've brought a half-blood and a cook to a fight against the law. These chains were forged in the blood of traitors, Kincaid. Even an alpha king cannot break them." Silas looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, ancient hatred. "And as for you, I should have drowned you in the lake the day you were born. You are the crack in the foundation. And tonight, I'm going to fill that crack with your blood." The men with the chains moved forward. I felt the wolfsbane beginning to sap my strength, the silver hum in my blood flickering. But I looked at my mother, then at Kincaid's back. I wasn't a mistake. I was the storm. And the storm doesn't bow to chains. The air in the cellar grew thick and yellow. The scent of wolfsbane was a physical weight, a poison that sought out the wolf in my blood and tried to put it to sleep. I saw Kincaid stagger, his shoulders hunching as he fought the invisible pressure. To a pure-blood alpha, wolfsbane was like breathing fire. It burned the senses and turned the muscles to lead. "You see, boy," Silas sneered, stepping closer as his guards began to whirl the heavy, dark chains. "You chose a gutter wolf over your own kind. Now you'll die in the gutter with her." One of the mercenaries lashed out. The chain, glowing with a dull, sickly green light, wrapped around Kincaid's forearm. He let out a choked roar of pain as the silver and wolfsbane seared his flesh. He fell to one knee, the stone floor cracking under his weight. "Kincaid," I cried out. I moved a step toward him, but the second guard swung his chain at me. I didn't think so. I didn't plan. I simply reacted. The white wolf in my mind didn't fear the wolfsbane. My human blood, the part of me Silas despised, acted as a filter. While the poison crippled Kincaid's pure wolf spirit, my dual nature allowed me to breathe where he could not. I reached out and caught the chain midair. The metal hissed against my palm, the wolfsbane stinging, but I didn't let go. I felt the mountain's coldness surge through my veins, neutralizing the burn. "My mother is not a cook," I said, my voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a power that made the shadows in the room dance. "She is a daughter of the high peaks, and I am her blood." I jerked the chain with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for my frame. The mercenary, caught off guard by a girl resisting the poison, was yanked forward. I planted my palm against his chest and let out a burst of kinetic energy, the same vibration I had used to shatter the bolts in the crags. He flew backward, hitting the stone wall with a sickening thud. Silas's eyes widened.
Impossible.
The bind should have paralyzed her. "I am not what you think I am, Silas," I growled. I turned to Kincaid. He was struggling, his skin turning gray as the chain around his arm tightened. I stepped to him and grabbed the glowing links. I focused all my heat, all the fire of the bond we shared, into my hands. The chain began to glow a bright, pure white, then shattered into 100 harmless pieces. Kincaid gasped, drawing in a ragged breath. The color returned to his face, and his eyes snapped open, pure, predatory silver. "My turn," he rasped. Kincaid didn't shift. He didn't need to. He moved with the speed of a lightning strike. He was a blur of vengeance, disarming the remaining guards before they could even reset their stance. The cellar was filled with the sound of breaking bone and the clatter of useless chains. Silas backed away, his face pale and sweating. He reached into his cloak for a silver dagger, his hand shaking. You are monsters. Both of you. The pack will never follow a king who breeds with a freak. The pack follows strength, Silas, Kincaid said, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. And you have shown them nothing but cowardice and poison. I stepped forward, standing side by side with my king. I could feel the villagers above us. I could hear their whispers through the floorboards, their growing unrest. Gabe had done his job. The king's guard was at the doors. Let's go show them the truth, I said. We led my mother up the stairs and burst through the heavy oak doors of the council hall. The village square was packed. Hundreds of wolves stood in the flickering torchlight, their faces a mask of confusion and fear. Bethany was there, clutching her father's arm, her eyes wide with horror as she saw me, dirty, powerful, and standing taller than any alpha. Kincaid stepped onto the stone dais, his hand firmly gripping Silas's collar. He threw the elder down at the feet of the people. Behold your lawgiver. Kincaid's voice boomed, carrying to the furthest edges of the woods. A man who uses the poison of our enemies to enslave his own king. A man who would murder an innocent woman to keep his grip on a world that is already gone. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. And behold Jessie, Kincaid said, turning to me. He took my hand and raised it high. She is a daughter of Silver Lake. She is the bridge between the old world and the new. She saved your king when the pure sought to destroy him. One of the older wolves, a man who had been a scout for decades, stepped forward. He looked at my eyes, then at the way the silver flowers on the mountain seemed to glow in response to my presence. He knelt. The prophecy of the white wolf, he whispered. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. One by one, the villagers began to kneel. Not out of fear, but out of a sudden, overwhelming recognition. The air felt lighter, the stagnant smell of Silas's rule washing away in a cool mountain breeze. But Silas wasn't finished. With a scream of pure madness, he lunged from the ground, the silver dagger aimed not at Kincaid, but at me. If I can't rule a pure kingdom, I will rule a graveyard, he shrieked. I didn't move. I didn't have to. A massive, white shape blurred past me. It was my mother. She hadn't shifted in 20 years, but the sight of her daughter in danger had shattered the cage she'd built around herself. She was a smaller wolf than Kincaid, but she was fast, a streak of winter mist. She tackled Silas, the dagger flying from his hand and clattering across the stones. She stood over him, a low, warning growl vibrating in her chest. Silas lay pinned, his spirit finally broken. Kincaid looked at the crowd, then at me. The old laws are dead, he declared. From this night forward, there are no half-bloods. There are only wolves of the West. And Jessie will sit beside me as your queen. The square erupted. It wasn't the forced howl of the coronation. It was a roar of hope. I looked at the mountain peaks, then at the man who had seen me when I was invisible. I wasn't the kitchen girl anymore. I was the storm that had cleared the air. The transition from a state of war to a state of peace didn't happen overnight. For days, Willow Creek was a hive of activity. The Iron Bind, mercenaries were chased out of the county, and the council hall, once a place of cold judgment, was thrown open to the people. I stood on the balcony of the Alpha's manor, the morning sun warming my skin. I was dressed in a gown of deep forest green, but beneath the silk, I still felt the wild pulse of the mountain. My mother was downstairs in the garden, teaching the young pups how to identify healing herbs. She looked younger than she had in years. The shadow of fear finally lifted from her brow. Kincaid stepped out onto the balcony behind me. He didn't wear his crown today.
He didn't need to.
The way the guard straightened when he passed, The way the villagers looked up at him with genuine respect, that was his true crown. The elders from the neighboring territories are arriving this afternoon, Kincaid said, leaning his elbows on the stone railing. They've heard what happened. They're nervous, Jesse. They've lived by Silas's rules for a century. Let them be nervous, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. Fear of change is just the first step toward accepting it. He turned to me, his gray eyes soft. I have a gift for you. Something that was recovered from the vaults Silas kept locked. He pulled a small, velvet pouch from his pocket. Inside was a circlet of white gold, fashioned into the shape of willow leaves and inlaid with moonstones. It wasn't heavy or imposing like his silver claw crown. It looked like it had been woven from the moonlight of the Silver Lake. The Queen's circlet of the high peaks, he whispered. It belonged to your great-grandmother. Silas thought he could bury your history, but the mountain doesn't forget. He placed it on my head. As the metal touched my skin, a wave of warmth washed over me. The white wolf in my mind let out a contented purr. I wasn't just a girl who had been recognized. I was a girl who had reclaimed her heritage. We have a lot of work to do, I said, looking out over the valley. The laws need to be rewritten. The schools need to be open to everyone. No more children growing up feeling like mistakes. We'll do it together, Kincaid promised, pulling me into a firm embrace. The coronation that had started in blood and secrets ended in the light of a new day. I was no longer invisible. I was the bridge. I was a hybrid. And I was home. 1 year later, the high peaks were no longer a place of exile. A small village had begun to grow near the Silver Lake, a place for those of mixed blood, for those who sought the ancient magic, and for anyone who didn't fit the rigid molds of the past. Kincaid and I visit often. We run through the crags, not as hunter and prey, but as mates. My shift is now complete. I am a wolf of mist and moonlight, smaller than his massive black form, but twice as fast. The world of the Western Territories has changed. Bethany is no longer a rival. She's a student in my mother's apothecary. The elders who once stood with Silas have either retired or learned to hold their tongues. But the most important change is in the eyes of the children. They no longer look at the ground when a pure blood passes. They look at the sky. I walked down to the edge of the Silver Lake, the same spot where Kincaid first helped me find my wolf. I looked at my reflection in the water. I didn't see a stray. I saw a queen. Kincaid walked up behind me, shifting into his human form and wrapping a cloak around us both. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about how a scent changed everything, I said, smiling. If you hadn't stopped at that pillar, I would have found you eventually, he said, kissing my temple. The moon doesn't let the sun stay hidden forever. We stood together as the stars began to twinkle over the Montana peaks, two souls bound by a scent, a secret, and a love that had rewritten the laws of the wild. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Jesse and King Kincaid. Comment below. Which part of the story did you find most intriguing? Was it the moment Kincaid recognized Jesse's scent at the coronation, or the battle in the crags where Jesse finally found her power? Also, where are you watching from today, and how is the weather? I love hearing from all over the world. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me. As a young channel, every single subscription helps us grow and allows me to keep creating these stories for you. Thank you for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next interesting story.